Oh my God. I cannot stand her accent.
You could just mute yourself for a couple of seconds.
Yes, possibly. Well, I forgot to do that some week, so we're continuing as we were. We were talking about chickens, hens, well, actually cockerels.
Actually, young cockerels. Yes.
One cockerel.
I have 5 cockerels altogether here. 4 of them are silkies, an adult, and all do the proper cock-a-doodle-doo.
Mm-hmm.
And then little Domino is a pekin, and he's only 3 months old now, I think he is, something like that. Which means he's barely getting adult, and he hasn't yet learned how to cock-a-doodle-doo. I've heard him. I heard somebody in that run the other day say "cocker." I turned around and they were all standing looking innocently, going, "It wasn't me. I didn't make that. It was him. It wasn't me." So I wasn't entirely sure who it was. I'm pretty sure everyone else in there is a hen. But this morning I actually saw him. And he stood up and thought about it, and then sort of looked around, and I suppose I have to. It's dawn. So it's 6 o'clock in the morning. He's dawn. I'm a cockerel. Cocker! Right. At which point, Charlie, who's my big black silky hen, silky cockerel, did the proper cock-a-doodle-doo from the barn. And they do need to learn how to do this. Domino will have cock-a-doodle-doo down pat soon, another week or 2.
People believe that people are actually going to turn on and listen to us talking about cockerels learning to make the correct cockerel noise.
Yes.
And they don't.
Well, they do.
Our young buzzard here hasn't got it yet.
But he will.
Assuming it's a he. He may not be, because the last year he was pretty sure it was a male, and their chick, and he was on and on and on and on. And I know you shouldn't generalize in this sort of way, but it did sound like man flu.
Yeah.
It really did.
I have had cockerels in the past learning to crow. The 2 young white silkies, Albert and Einstein, are a case in point, because last year they couldn't figure out how to stop crowing.
Oh God.
I'd hear cock-a-doodle, oodle, oodle. Oh, for goodness sake. You could almost hear them in the middle going, how do I stop doing this?
Where's the off switch? Quick.
There's a line in one of Terry Pratchett's novels where the witches are trying to write a letter, and somebody is sent off somebody's trying to write a letter, somebody is sent off to ask, how do you stop spelling banana? It's very much like that.
Yeah. And that is one that I do already. I mean, my worst one, and it was terrible when she was actually my teacher. One of my psychology teachers was called Barbara. Oh, and it went, rah, 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 rah. And in those days, you still used to largely write letters and things. And the pen would just sort of go on. And she was a very nice woman, very astute and very witty. And she would sort of look at the note that I put in and sort of said, I'm glad you think I'm happy today. I'm in a rah-rah mood, am I? Yeah. You go, Barbara, shut up, please. I can't help it. My pen just goes on, so it's the same sort of thing. But no, our current chick.
Every year, the owls have to learn how to hoot properly. You must have heard them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's all sorted now. I mean, we shan't hear any of that until next springish time, late spring. But no, our current buzzard chick seems to have largely got it, that, you know, nobody is going to come and bring extra mice for her. Nobody is actually going to give a shit that mum and dad have buggered off on holiday, and she is the only buzzard we've got at the moment. And, you know, normally I can see 2 or 3 flying around. No, there's just the one at the moment, but she does seem to have largely got it. So I wonder now, quite serious, I should take it up with Shropshire Ornithology. I can't say anything.
Yeah,
Ornithology, the Shropshire bird lot, and ask them, you know, if anybody else has this experience, because they've all got good senses of humour, and to say that, you know, I sort of think my male buzzards get man flu when you know, the parents bugger off and won't feed them anymore. They would like it. They would actually like it. So we'll just have to see.
Yes.
As
I can't tell the gender of young birds in that way.
well, it's only a guess.
And when they get adult and they're different sizes, that helps. But when they're just out of the nest and they're half grown and still squeaking, they all look very much the same.
Well, they don't. I mean, you follow the dovey ospreys, don't you? Like I do, and they're ever so good. And they call all the chicks until they get up to ring them. Of course, they don't know what the chick is, and the chick doesn't either until it's ringable, because, you know, they don't actually develop properly. But anyway, until that time, they call them all Bob. It's Bob 1, Bob 2, Bob 3.
Yes.
But once, of course, they've got up and they've ringed them, then we know what we've got, and then they do a lovely name choosing game, don't they? Yes. Or have you not seen it?
I have seen it, yes.
It's really funny because they've got one of the blokes, I think two of the people there are Welsh, and one of them certainly speaks Welsh properly, and they try to call all of their ospreys after a hill or a river or something like that place in Wales, and there are plenty of streams and hills and things to call them by. And so they come along and they zoom this so you can see it happen. And they bring in the poor chap who's English and doesn't speak Welsh. And they've all asked us for a whole collection of names. So they've got the names. And they ask him to try and say them.
Oh, that is unfair.
Well, it isn't. He doesn't mind in the slightest. But, you know, when you've got something like that terrible place that ends up with go, go, go.
For PG, yes.
Oh, for God, she's going to do it. Oh, no, I don't believe it. No. Go on then, do it.
Fanfare PG is as far as I get.
All right, okay. I can just do the ending and that's fine. And anyway, when you've got something like that, he sort of says, no, I can't do that. But then they try him with other ones, and sort of he and they choose the ones that he can say best. And so that means all of us can also say them, you know, all of us who are not Welsh and don't speak Welsh.
Yes.
And we've all got a chance. I mean, the current female is Tellin. Well, I can handle Tellin, and the current male is Idris. And I can handle Idris, and I cannot remember what the chick's called at the moment. But they're perfectly good names that any of us could stand. This is starting to sound like the naming of cats, isn't it?
It is a
comfortable everyday names.
Yes.
But no, it's rather sort of sweet. But you can't tell a young chick until you get up close and personal with it, which was where I was last night. When this is what we sort of thought what we were saying, so it goes on for. There's this question which I think is really important for everybody at the moment, because everybody wants to rewild. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people want to rewild.
Yes.
And most people don't really know much about it other than grow a patch of nettles and don't mow my lawn, which is great. And, you know, I'm not knocking it at all. It's absolutely fine. And if that's what you can do, that's what you can do. But people want to go sort of further. Well, okay, I'm encouraging the brambles, but I don't really want to live in a complete bramble patch. What do I do? And how do I do this? And all this sort of thing. And then there was this lovely article, which I think you've read, Fiona, James Aldred's article about his weeks and months photographing gospel chicks in the New Forest at the beginning of lockdown, when we were all too terrified to come out of our doors. And what he says, it's up on my Wise Woman page, Do go and read it, because he's a fantastic wildlife photographer. He really, really is. And the program is going to come out pretty soon, I gather. And B, it's like, once there were no people in the forest, all the animals came out, all the birds came back.
Badgers and foxes in the middle of the day.
Everything.
Yes.
And all the birds were friendly and talking. And he discovered, I sort of not quite sure he discovered it then, because he's been doing this bird thing for 20 odd years. But he told us about learning the language of the birds. And I was brought up to do this because I had a woodsman uncle who used to say, come on, let's go for a walk in the woods. And so we would go, and he would say, now, what do you think that wren's saying now? And then, I don't know, a sparrowhawk would come down and say, well, was she telling them all that there was a sparrowhawk coming? She could feel it. And he started to learn this, because goshawks are as silent as owls.
Yes.
And they can
come from anywhere.
They're amazing. They're gorgeous hawks. But they can fly through branches and not touch anything.
Yes.
And they are forest dwellers. And so he couldn't hear them coming. So he wouldn't necessarily be ready with his camera. And all of a sudden there'd be a chick there. Oh, I'm in the wrong direction, you know, that kind of shit. So he started to hear how the birds, because they can actually sense the hawk coming as well as hear them and maybe see them. Because
they would be talking to each other about it.
Exactly. And he started to learn when they were saying, goshawk coming down, guys. And and he could tell the direction, because the birds knew what direction it was. So he could get the camera pointing in the right place to get the shots.
It's very much like tracking, you know, cries of incoming across the woods.
Yeah. And also incoming what?
Yes.
Because they know the difference. They don't just yell danger, danger, danger.
Oh no.
They say, sparrowhawk or goshawk or bloody idiot crow or something.
One of the very first lessons I was taught about bird songs was blackbirds make a different alarm call for humans and for all other predators.
Yeah.
So when you hear your resident blackbird sitting in the hedge going pink, 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 it's completely different from when they're sitting in the hedge going fox, which is a much softer, directionless sound.
Yeah. And they all have this. And if you really want to get into rewilding, I'm not saying you have to go and learn the language of every bird or anything like that. I mean, it's up to you what you do. You can do it if you want to. But the closer you get to nature, the better you'll be able to rewild, and you'll be able to sort out those brambles in a way that enables you still to get blackberries, enables the creatures that need the blackberries, like the dormice and the other mice and some of the birds, to also have them without, needing a machete every time you come out the front door.
Yes.
And shut up. We've both been there too.
My problem is not brambles, but docks. Yes.
But it's a similar sort of thing. But again, you're learning about what docks do, what they need, and why you've got so many docks now. So tell us about it.
Well, the thing with docks is that docks are an immensely deep-rooted plant. And they're it's a great thick taproot that goes down and down and down, which is why you can't dig them out, because it just regrows every time. But the whole point is that they're bringing nutrients up from deep down. Docks are a plant that says this soil is poor, it needs help. And that's what docks do. So in a sense, when you're trying to dig the docks out, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. So what I'm trying to do is, fortunately, I have 4 big horses. Now, 4 big horses producing 2 tons of manure each per year adds up to a lot of fertility to put on the ground. So I'm slowly doing that. And I also have the sheep, Ross and Gregor, who love eating young docks, which horses don't.
Yeah.
So hopefully I'll get a few more sheep, because 2 small sheep don't make much of an impact. But they are keeping the ducks down on what used to be my front lawn, and will one day be grazing again. And that's the way I'm approaching it, rather than trying to hack and burn or pour weed killer over it.
Yeah.
I'm attempting to correct my land so that it's no longer needing the ducks, and then they'll go away.
Yeah.
And also I've got the sheep nibbling down the top shoots so that they don't seed so much.
And putting the fertilizer back on the ground again in the normal way that animals do. And this is the point. I mean, if you read Isabella Tree's book, Wilding, they were able to leave everything alone. And at first it was covered in all the things you think you don't want, that you have been trained to take out.
Yes.
And they didn't. And she says it was really hard to sit on your hands because all of your trained instincts were saying, more, there's something about that, more, there's something about that. But they didn't. They managed it. And as they left it, because they've been doing it, what, 15 years now? Something like that. Anyway. As they left it, so the docks pulled up like enough nutrient that soil wanted. And that's the other thing, that the docks will put the right amount of nutrient on. We might get it wrong, but the docks won't. And once they were ready, then there was just a few docks maybe in the hedge.
Yes.
But not fieldfuls. Also,
they had the right sort of grazers.
That was really important too. Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't just have any old farm cattle or milk cattle.
And no, you have to have the right species. And you have to have the right breed if you're using cattle instead of bison.
Which then it's very hard to use bison in this country.
I have a feeling bison come under the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, and you need a zoo license. Whereas for cows, all you need is a farm license, and they had that already.
Yeah.
And they had their county parish holding number, as it's rather anachronously known.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which doesn't take very much to do, having done it here. You tell them how much ground you've got and apply for a license, and they decide if it's over 2 hectares, they'll let you have it, and that's roughly 4 acres. So what you have to do then is try and choose the right breed that will graze selectively and browse as well as graze. For your land.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the less improved it is, the better. So you don't want a herd of Frisians. You want something like Dexter's or Kerry's or Highlands or something like that. Something that's still fairly close to its beginnings.
I can't remember what she used. It wasn't White Park, but it was something that was eventually big enough that you can actually buy some beef from them now.
Yes.
Because they do take a few cows out cattle out every year.
British whites.
I've got a feeling it was a brown cow of some variety. Like, anyway, whatever it was.
Yes.
It was not an improved version. I mean, you could use Highland cattle. Highland cattle are very tough, and I think they're beautiful anyway.
Yes.
And they do seem to cope in a lot of places. But if you've got very low-lying wet ground, they probably won't be so good.
Not so much Highlands, no. There I would be going for the Gloucesters.
Yeah.
Because they of course come from Gloucestershire and the floodplain of the Severn.
Or I would probably go for Dexters, but Dexters are incredibly wild and crazy. They're very small, and
they are very small.
Fast as hell.
They're quite fast. They have little pointy horns. They're very nice cows.
They're sweet. I've met them.
Bulls are a bit difficult.
They can be, yeah.
But then bulls in general are quite tricky.
And you've got to know what you're doing again. Yes. So here we are, we're back to this, you want to do this. And it's it's not necessary, but it's quite a good idea to have a bull and 3 or 4 cows.
Bulls are always better when they've got cows.
Exactly. Do not just have a bull.
No.
Do not just have gelded male cows. Because they're boys. Let's face it, they're boys.
Yes.
They're going to behave like boys. and they do.
Yes.
And but
also, you've got to consider the psychological requirements of the animal. They have evolved to live in a mixed gender, mixed age herd.
Yeah.
They need, a tough-minded old cow to keep them in order.
Yeah.
And they'll
yes,
enjoy
it is always the old cow who does it.
Oh, yeah. There are reasons why you talk about people being a right old mare as well. And again, they keep the herd in order.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The bull or the stallion is there. He plays with youngsters. He guards. He's obviously going to father a lot of offspring. He may have a few subordinate lieutenants, younger versions,
which they usually, quite often do. Yeah,
they quite often do, particularly cattle. Horses not so much, but even in wild horse herds, you'll often see a younger stallion helping.
Interestingly, and we saw this in action when we went down to Cornwall, didn't we? So do wolves. There is sort of like, it's not the alpha male. There is a senior alpha, a senior male there.
Yes.
But he will have 3 or 4 male lieutenants who do things with him. And actually they all run under the feet. They do their own, what they do. And this one is a real sort of checker outer and maybe meter greeter. This one is the one who does any defending if it needs doing, etc. But they'll all come under the female who is going to have the cubs. She's
the one they call the decision maker.
Yeah, and she is the lady. She is like Ellen of the Way. She is the lady of the land.
Yes.
Because she's the one who's going to have the offspring for the pack. And they do sort this out. And sometimes it can get a little difficult. I mean, the pack the family, let's not call it a pack, that we met, there was an older female, but she wouldn't be having cubs. It was the younger one who would be having the cubs, and the 2 females were like sorting this out between them.
Yes.
As to who was going to have what role and how much did each of them want it, and all this sort of thing. Yeah. So, I mean, isn't that getting up close and personal with nature?
Oh, yes. I have found it absolutely fascinating watching my little herd of horses here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I started out with 1 young gelding. And I didn't actually plan on doing this whole thing with the herd at all. But then when I got George, my troubled boy, he needed the social structure. He needed somebody to tell him what to do, but I couldn't do it because, well, for a start, I'm only a quarter of his size.
Anyway, you're human.
And I'm human. He needed an older mare. So I got an older mare who came with a foal. So she knew what she was doing with babies. And she does put him in his place. In fact, everyone's terrified of her. When Poppy says, everyone just tugs forelock and gets on with it.
or if Poppy says jump, they'll go, hi.
Yes. So immediately we've got this mixed gender, mixed age herd. And they've all found and fallen into their own role within it. So that Abe, who's the oldest of the geldings, is an I'll stand back and hold your coat go sort of chap.
Yeah.
And George, who is younger, but much bigger and braver, is always the one who's sent, but go find out if that is dangerous. And he will go and find out. And Abe will follow behind him and stop 40 yards back. I'm holding your coat, boss. You go get him, big man. Yeah. And then Dancer, the young female, will be standing at the back, or third one back in the line, watching the boys and going, I could do that, Meanwhile, her mother's standing at the back going, that's not ladylike, get back here right now. And she is teaching Dancer how to be a herdman, a herd leader.
And all animals do this. Now, funnily enough, so do plants.
Yes.
And this is something we don't realize.
We're only just beginning to notice this now.
Well, it's only just really coming into general light. I mean, this is that, and I can never pronounce the poor man's name, this wonderful German forester's book, The Hidden Life of Trees.
Yes.
Now, he's really got it, and he's very readable, so recommended for him. But trees are families, and they all are. And one of the things that he discovered, which is, I think, really important for gardeners, is they don't like being a specimen tree.
No.
They're the only human on Mars.
It's a very unpleasant place to be.
There's nobody else like me.
Well, the natural state for a tree is in a grove, in a wood.
And there will be others like them. I mean, not all crushed. I mean, if you're an oak tree, no, they do get together, but then they need a lot more space. I mean, they're so huge. Ditto ash trees kind of thing.
But that's what squirrels are for. They move acorns a decent distance away and bury them.
Well, sometimes.
Enough of them.
But that's also what deer are for.
Yes.
Because they come along and they nibble all the young shoots. Yes. And they nibble all. This is one of the partial reasons, not the total one, why your poor land is so horribly deforested. That and sheep, isn't it?
Yes.
And both of which will come.
And also the overpressure of deer because of the way they're managed for shooting.
Yes. There's too many.
You have lots of deer so that you can get lots of money from people to come and shoot them as trophies. Then you have too many deer and they will eat all the tree shoots. It is very noticeable that if you simply fence any area in the Highlands, it will grow trees.
Absolutely, just like that. Yeah. And one of my favourite. Well, you've got it there, but I mean, one of my favourite places is Trees for Life.
Yes.
And they're just doing this. They're just saying, right, no deer in here for a bit. Once the trees are big enough and the wood's established enough, the deer can come back. You're not keeping deer out forever and ever and ever because they're a forest species. They live in forests.
They do, yes. And in fact, when you realise that on the continent where deer live in forests, then their deer are actually the same species as ours, but they're 30% bigger.
Much happier. Much healthier. I mean, if you actually go and look at, and there's a very good Simon King program ages ago on this, and he went to one of the big herds in Scotland, and 30 odd, maybe more % of those deer were sick.
Yes.
Because there were too many.
I've got a photo here I'm going to share.
Go for it.
Because it's very much exactly
what I know the one I think is.
Well, there are quite a lot of them. You can see the difference. There's the deer fence.
See?
There's where the deer can roam. And here's where they haven't done anything but just shut the deer out.
Yeah.
And look at the difference.
I mean, it started, and this is a part of the wildlifing thing and the rewilding thing. They've started by letting that ground alone. And the first thing that's come up is the low ground cover.
Here it's heather. You can see how long that heather is.
Yeah. But there will be more medium-sized, bushes and small trees.
And you can see there are birches coming up here.
Exactly. And they're the next ones who come. And then there will be Scots pine, probably pretty quickly already. And I mean, looks like those guys at the back. Yeah, they look like Scotties.
And the other thing to notice here is look at this. This is erosion.
Yeah.
That's wind and weather.
Yeah. And footprints.
Yes. And it's stripping the soil off because there are no trees to hold it.
Yeah.
That network of roots just isn't there.
Yeah. And the network of grassroots is so grazed down, so heavily grazed, because there are too many people eating it, too many deer, too many sheep eating it. The roots, it will gradually die. It is dying. I mean, down the bottom here, it has died. Yeah.
That's bare soil. And you can see it. There's no soil left. It's just gravel.
Yeah. And then there's that stony path. That's all that's left is bits of rock. Bits of mother's been skinned.
Yes.
Mother Earth has been skinned down there.
And it's exactly the same thing that you see in field gateways. I have it on the walkway where my horses go in and out. It's bare soil.
Yeah.
Because there's too many hooves trampling, the grass just can't grow.
Yeah.
That and the fact that every time a blade comes up, a horse eats it.
True. And so when you decide to do some rewilding, and please do it in your back garden, your front garden, in town, whatever you decide. But start to think about who needs what. And this is what getting up close and personal with nature is about. So you have to discover what worms need. And how many different sorts of worms there are.
Oh, yes.
And that, you know, these red ones will do your compost bin better, but these ones, the brown ones, the big thick ones, will really move your soil for you really well.
And that is actually how you know when your compost is done, because the red worms go off somewhere else.
Because
And
they've
the
got
huge, thick, browny grey ones come up, and then now you've got earth, and you've got earthworms instead of red compost worms in your compost.
That's why they're called earthworms.
Yeah.
It's a clue. And then you've got your nettle patch, which, and you do need it. There are, was it half a dozen different varieties of butterfly? Maybe.
Something like that. Yes.
I don't think there's any more, but I think it's about that many. And they need nettles because that's where their caterpillars, that's where they lay their eggs. That's where their caterpillars feed and grow, and where they overwinter again in the rough.
Yes.
At the bottom, in the dead
bit. The nettle stalks, the actual stem, will stand all winter.
Yeah.
And it'll only come down in the spring when the spring winds knock it down. But by then, the green shoots are coming up underneath.
And the critters who've overwintered in that, because it's a hollow, it's one of these, is it hexagonal? It's hexagonal, isn't it? I think.
Something like that.
But it's hollow.
In the middle.
Well, it isn't while it's growing, obviously, because it's full of sap and that sort of thing. But when it's died, it's hollow. And they live in that hollow shoot.
Mm.
And so don't go cutting them down when they're dead. Not unless you desperately need to. If you desperately need to, and there are reasons why, and I'm actually having to do it a bit now. But think about it, because you're knocking somebody's home down.
Yes. And also ask what that nettle is showing you about the soil. Nettles love high nitrogen.
And when you take them out of your ground, so I needed some more salad bed. So we had a negotiation. I've actually ended up with a path as well as a salad bed, because that's what the garden wanted to give me. Great, I'm all for that. So we took the nettles up, and I would suggest, if you're going to do that, the top, where it's been growing leaves, you can compost that, and it's brilliant compost. Don't, unless you're very experienced, try and compost the roots. All you will get is a compost bin full of well-grown nettles.
Yes. But if you take those nettle roots and some of the greenery and put it into a container of water, you get a super high nitrogen fertilizing fluid that you can then use to water growing plants.
And actually, you will succeed in killing off the nettle roots.
You will, yes. Drown them.
Yeah. Good.
I tend to cut the tops and let them wilt for a few hours and then feed them to the horses.
I do.
Because the horses love fresh nettles. Once they're just wilted so that the stings don't bite them anymore, the horses will scoff that lovely high protein feed. And they love it.
And it really is good. And there's a lot of people now, including those lovely lassies down in the Cairngorms, who, when I come up again, we must go down there and meet them.
Yes.
They collect nettles, and they've actually got pictures of their barns that, you know, they've got hay, then they've got nettle hay, and then they've got leaf hay, branch hay, because they've got enough woods to be able to take some branches and keep it for some winter fodder.
Yes. It used to be very, very much used in the days before we had baling machines, when all the hay had to be cut by hand. Farmers would also use what they call foggage, which is dried standing grass.
Yeah.
And it is simply leave your hayfield till it's gone over and dried in the winter, and then just let your animals go and graze it. Because that's what they would naturally eat in the winter anyway if they were wild animals.
Yeah.
So you've got your foggage, and then there's tree hay, which is dried tree branches.
Yeah.
And then there's all your herb hays like nettle hay and dried comfrey leaves.
Yeah,
another good one.
Absolutely.
Very, very high feed value in dried comfrey leaves. And these are all things that would naturally dry in the wild anyway.
And what nature naturally designed to go over, this is an awful lot of why herbaceous plants, gardener terms, why herbaceous plants die down in the winter, because they then become roughage for the roughage feeders. And horses are a particularly good example, but all cattle eat roughage food as well.
Yes.
And this is really, really important. And now we steal 500 million acres of habitat from poor little wildlife critters to plough it up and then grow special hay of one or two particular varieties of grass, or corn or straw or something.
Indeed.
And we cost fortunes, and the footprint, the ecological footprint of growing a field of hay or of straw or of wheat or barley or anything is huge.
It is, and the resulting hay actually isn't that good for your animals.
No, because it's not.
If you feed a horse on nothing but ryegrass, you'll have a sick horse.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
you get sick cows as well. The same thing.
You do. Cows tolerate it a bit better,
but they still end up all runny.
They do, and the other thing there is that it does cut their lifespan. I mean, a cow can live for 30 years, but your average cow probably only manages 10.
If they're lucky, because we don't, it's like fridges and cars, you know, you get a new one every 3 years.
And chickens.
Indeed.
Good grief, the farms. We produce millions upon millions of eggs. There's a farm up the road from me that produces 7.8 million eggs a year. And they do that by hothousing their chickens. Their chickens live for a year and then they are culled, which means killed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if they're lucky, they're rescued by one of the charities and rehomed. Yeah. But they're bred to lay an egg every day, and sometimes 2 eggs a day if you get a really good one. She will actually pop out the occasional 2 eggs a day. But every day for a year, she'll lay 1 egg. And then she's finished because that's it. She's completely
exhausted. She's utterly exhausted.
She's lost all her feathers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she doesn't know how to scratch and run around and pull up worms. Mm-hmm. And then if they're lucky, they're rescued by one of the charities and rehomed. Mm-hmm. And you take on a rescued chicken and it's bald and it's scraggy and it sits and does not walk properly. Yeah. And then over the next few weeks, they grow their feathers back in and they learn to scratch and scrap and dig around. And they'll carry on laying for another couple of years.
They won't ever live as long as a properly looked after hen will.
We had, the longest lived chicken we've ever had was 13 years old.
Yeah.
She was called Digger. Now, we do actually know her breeding because she was about the 4th generation that my mother had bred. Mm. And there was a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of something else. And there was, right back at the beginning of it, there was actually an egg-laying breed, a black rock. Mm. But at 13, she was laying 6 eggs a year. Mm. Well, that's not commercially viable.
No. But she was a very happy hen.
She was a very happy hen, and we called her Digger because any gardening you were doing, you had to watch out in case you chopped her head off with a spade because she was so into it. So you'd dig a bit and then you'd move a foot away while Digger was busy on that bit. You could be digging another bit. And then one day she was dead in the nest box.
And she'd been very happy, and she just decided, right, time to go. Well,
yeah, and she'd raised a few generations of offspring of her own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and she'd done an awful lot of digging up of the garden. Now, there again, if you keep chickens, I don't have too much trouble with the chickens digging up my garden because they've got the whole run of the place. Mm. There are a few places where they've put dust baths in, and fair enough, they look like bomb sites. That's just the nature of a dust bath.
Yeah, that's what they want. Yeah.
And that's what they need it because that's what they use for keeping parasites down on their skins. Yeah. They get right into the dust and they stuff it under their feathers and they scriggle around, and it just is a conditioner for their skin, and it keeps the parasites down. Yeah. I like to mix a bit of wood ash into it, which they love.
Yeah.
And that again discourages parasites. Yeah. You can put a bit of flea powder in if you want as well. Mm-hmm. I don't normally because I haven't had a problem with fleas, but if you do, you can. But if you keep them in a small area, they're going to make it look like a bomb site all over because they simply haven't enough room.
And so if you want to keep chickens, the best, and you want to garden, I can't keep chickens. I can't look after the poor things anymore. Though I did used to look after my uncles. But I want a garden as well. Mm. And so if I was going to do it, I would have to make sure that the part that they could go into, or the garden, was in that sense chicken fenced. And that's probably what I do. I mean, Fiona knows what my place is like. So, I mean, I could do the whole of what's the car park and even some of the veg garden. And
yes,
although
they'll pick all the slugs off your lettuces. They will
yeah,
take
but they'll probably eat all my strawberries and raspberries too.
Oh, they will definitely take all your
which I don't want them to do. But I could have
having said that, we used to have an enormous amount of enjoyment watching the chickens in the raspberry patch, because if a chicken can jump perhaps twice their own height,
yeah,
and we just had this arrangement that we have sufficient raspberries that there's enough for them to take the bottom half of the bush, and we'll pick the top half. And you see this chicken bouncing up and grabbing and bouncing and grabbing, and they come down with a raspberry each time.
Yeah,
and it was very funny, and we enjoyed it very much.
We had a similar sort of thing with the blackbirds were particularly good at it at my last house. I think you've seen them doing it. And my raspberry patch was quite old by then, and so it was a decent height and everything, you know. And they were flying, but they would fly into the bottom, and then they would literally jump, but they'd also flap to grab a raspberry high up. Yes. But again, they had the bottom layer of raspberry.
Blackbirds are somewhat better at it than chickens. Chickens do it, but they're not great at flying.
But it was still funny watching them come in. Ooh, zoom, you know. The only thing I had to save, and I have to do it here too, is I have to net off part of the cherry trees, because otherwise I don't get any cherries, and I actually do like cherries. And so, you know, we have a negotiated thing that these branches are going to be netted off, those you can have, sort of thing. And we're fine on that, which is good. So if you want to do rewilding, it means you have to get into what everything from the earthworms and the ants and the bees and the butterflies and everything are doing, and the animals, because you need the animals in the garden as well, and the larger and the little animals, little mice and things, and the larger animals, and then all the large plants.
Don't forget the hedgehog door. Hedgehogs are important.
But get to know them all. Get to know what they do.
Find your space amongst them rather than imposing yourself on them.
Absolutely, which is really sort of important in that sort of way. And I can feel something happening out there that I think we're going to have to stop.
Right.
Because I think I have things happening that I have to get to. So great to see you all, people. And we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Take care then.